All right, welcome. You nailed it, WJ. WJ says North Renaissance painting. Yeah, I actually closed the window. I was actually scrambling around because I was trying to find out who it was. I believe you are correct. Let me see if I can pull it up. I should. Not that the person it matters to that particular artist since they're along on the other side of things, but let me see who was it. Now, of course, it'll be that I can't find it. Wait, no, still not. Yeah, there's a lot of. It's thank you, Jan Bruegel the Elder, as I just ran across it from 1607. People have been, the AI art thing. Look, I get it from a product standpoint. I've always enjoyed. I think the AI art from just a fun thing, which I tend to do with my thumbnails, but people seem to have soured on that. I've noticed some negative comments, and I'm not necessarily swayed by the comments, but I figure if I can use stuff that's out there, I'm not averse to doing it. So yeah, I went with a Bruegel the Elder painting. The painting is called A Woodland Road with Travelers. And just for those folks who are looking for artwork for various purposes, there are some. Look at museums. Museums are a great source for public domain kind of curated art. So Met Museum is where I got this one, which is one of my local museums. Is I'm in New York City, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The British Museum has a bunch. Hey, Ian, the Smithsonian has a bunch. Who else? I want to say that there's a Dutch museum whose name I can't remember, but there's a ton. And I think I want to say Yochai Gal has also put together a list that might have these museums on it also of places to get public domain art. And there's a lot of good stuff because you obviously have stuff throughout history. And since we're usually playing kind of medieval or earlier timescapes, there's tons of different materials, arts that's out there that's obviously free and clear as long as you can get a picture of it. Heck, go to your museum and take a picture yourself. Also would work. Lots of stuff out there. So hope how's everyone doing with their Lore24? I myself am doing okay. I think I'm on track. I'm trying to, as I mentioned before, trying to kind of keep it simple, keep it not too crazy. I'm trying to pull out some D6s for a little bit later when we do the community feed. It's really been fascinating to read people. I'll go through and I'll read some. One of the things, I won't say it's not a problem per se, but a challenge in this context, a challenge in the context of this kind of stream is because like what everybody's doing, and myself included, we're kind of building off work. So I have a bunch of entries that are all kind of related to a thing that I'm sort of working on. And then what ends up happening is, or not what ends up happening, not the right word. When I am looking to read things on stream, it's kind of hard to pick out one entry because sometimes you need the context of the previous entries. It's kind of building off of them. So it's kind of like, well, oh no, one of my dice just went flying into the. I'll find you later. I was just looking for some D6s. I lost a die. Oh, no, wait. It was close enough I could just grab it. So that we'll see which ones to read. It's going sluggish. The thing is, I always try to keep in mind is I just need to get something out there for the day. And on the one hand, it seems difficult. On the other hand, and maybe because I'm looking at a lore, right? It could be anything. And I'm okay doing something small. If what I've got is something tiny, I'm okay doing something tiny. And I think that's that kind of that internal challenge is right. Is how much are you going to feel like you did enough to feel like I've got something to write? And for me, it's like I just want something. Just give me something small, or for myself, I just want something small. And I've been so far. I mean, it's only 2 weeks out of 52, so only 50 weeks left to go. So far, I've been okay at finding. Okay, here's the thing, and I can end up kind of writing about it. And in fact, that actually, what I'll get into, I think I might even try to go smaller in my write-ups. But if I have stuff to write, if I have stuff to say about something, I'm going to say it. I'm not going to cut myself off because part of the whole point is to get that inspiration. And if that inspiration drives you, then then go, right? But not to, but just to give yourself that, be generous with yourself, and that if today or tomorrow or whenever you don't get that font of inspiration and you just manage to eke out a sentence or two, that's also enough. A name is enough. A concept is enough. Like anything is enough. It doesn't have to be. Not every day is going to be the, where you're going to find yourself typing hundreds of words. Now, nothing says the styles of Lore24 are very different. It's interesting. Probably has to do with use case. Yeah, and yes, and I also think, and hey, Dave, I also think that it's also what people are coming from, right? So I'm coming from mostly, I have ideas in my brain, and this is giving me opportunity to kind of flesh them out a bit. But I don't have, I'm not transferring a bunch of stuff that I already have. Whereas some of the other folks who were on the forums, which I'll get to in a minute, um, who have been posting stuff, are kind of transcribing and editing and maybe updating some things that they already have a lot of material. So we go look at, for example, Dungeon Master Masterclasses stuff. He's got, other than comments, like he's got some big pieces, but I think a lot of this is stuff that he's maybe reworking or kind of working through that he's already had in some form, and then he's kind of doing a, I don't know how much is it he's just writing out or is he's updating or whatever, but he's using this as an opportunity to kind of reflect on materials already there. So of course, every entry for him might have a lot to it because he's got all that much. And like I joked, I think last week or even on the first stream, he's got things here where this would be, at least probably 2 days worth. I would have one here, and like these, I'd split up into two and not have one. But I'm running them from scratch, right? Whereas he's coming with some kind of preconceived stuff that he's pulling along, and that's of course the great thing to do. It's a great invitation. You've got all this stuff you've built up on your world. Maybe it's in various formats, and here is an excuse or reason for you to go through all your notes. Maybe some of them are handwritten. Maybe some of them are different notes apps. Maybe you started in Word and then you migrated over to another, Obsidian or one of those things like that. And now you want to kind of, maybe now you're using a third app. Now you haven't gotten around to bringing everything together. This is a great reason to say, hey, every day I'm going to take something that I read or I wrote a while back. I'm going to kind of reread it and rethink of how it figures into me. And then I'm going to put it in this new, whatever it is, if there is one, or even just make kind of a fresh copy that's got kind of all my updated information. And of course, hopefully as I'm rereading and now rewriting this stuff, I'll get new ideas and new ways I want to tweak it out something better. And I can kind of integrate that, and bam, there's my thing. Oh man, Dave's got COVID. Yeah, feel better. The COVID, yeah, it stinks. It stinkers. So everyone's using this for different, which I think is good. I think it's good. I hopefully that people are, and I haven't really been surfing out in the greater world to see what Lore24 things are doing. I suppose we could. I know I follow the hashtag on Mastodon, but I haven't been reading them much lately, or I haven't really been on Mastodon too much or any of the social media too much lately. So I'm not sure what's going on. So that'd be interesting. I know some folks were specifically using Mastodon to kind of keep that word count low, to kind of force you to be like, okay, I'm just going to do this little piece, right? Which I think is actually a good, and I have some more ideas on that, but I think giving yourself a limit is probably good. To say basically, all right, I'm not going to go more than whatever this space is. And maybe, though I don't know, I'm torn, because yes, I do think like sticking the space is good, but like I said, also I think that if you have that inspiration and now you're like, I have hundreds of words to say, I think you want to get it out there. I don't think you want to stop yourself, but I think if you can look at it and say, hey, if I just kind of basically do a tweet or a whatever Mastodon calls their things worth of stuff, then that's enough. I think that's probably also good. Kind of like I really don't think there should be a minimum. Minimum is just something, whatever, throw it out there, because you can always come back to it. It's just a good way to get your stuff down. So I'm going to read a selection of things from different folks who have posted. I'm trying to see, let's see. So one of the things that Dungeon Master Masterclass have been doing, which I think is really cool, was about creating some books. So here I'll start. I guess I'll start here. So this was from a couple days ago. He says, I'm adding a mechanic to my game where you can learn secret knowledge, generally from books, that gives you mechanical benefits, generally for wizards. These aren't magic books, just books that contain information you didn't have before and let you do something you couldn't do before. Here is the rule and an example. All right, so we go. So you can get knowledge from something, potentially a book, potentially something else, and that's going to have some kind of mechanical effect. It isn't magic, but it is. You're getting new knowledge. So first, I guess, is the mechanic, or maybe it's the kind of book. So for the book or whatever it is called Arcane Secrets. Books of Arcane Secrets, or maybe it's a type. Books of Arcane Secrets contain information about the workings of magic that is beyond what the average wizard knows. Once a wizard learns these secrets, they permanently gain some mechanical benefits. That's kind of cool. It's almost like techniques, right? You're not learning a new spell, but maybe you're learning a new way of casting spells that's more efficient or just does something better. And so now you're just kind of better at it, right? You read the Wizards for Dummies, and now you've gone and found some other wizard book. It's like, oh, this is Wizardry 201. And now you get a little bit extra. The specific benefit granted will be given in the description of the book. The wizard may try to learn arcane secrets from the book as many times as he likes. The first attempt takes 10 hours of study, the second 100 hours, the third 1,000. All right, so you're going to tend to want to hopefully get it on the first or second try. First try, I hope, because how many days is 1,000 hours? That's a lot. After each attempt, the wizard takes both an unmodified learned spell roll and a spell casting check. If both pass, the wizard learns the arcane secret and gains the mechanical benefit. If the wizard succeeds in learning from a book multiple times, all benefits are doubled or tripled, etc. Okay. So you got to make 2 rolls, which could be rough depending on, and I think he has kind of his own sort of system. Obviously, there's some homebrew stuff, so I don't know I'm not even sure I know which system he's using. So if he's using one kind of by the book, not, no pun intended. So you got to make 2 rolls, learn spell, and then a spell casting check. And if you do it, you've learned it. If not, then you got to go back to the well, but you can keep doing it, I suppose. I wonder if the prep time, because I think the only thing I would think here is 2 rolls is kind of rough. I get what it's interesting because I don't know how I feel about the rolling for stuff like that, because on the one hand, you shouldn't just, 10, I think those things that just kind of take up downtime, it's tricky, right? Because you can sort of abuse downtime in that way. I'm putting abuse in quotes. At some point, you're going to have enough money where you can take downtime. And presuming there's no world events that are driving you out of wherever you are, especially if it's only 10 hours, okay, then you can kind of spam these kind of downtime things. And if there's no resource cost or chance of failure, theoretically, you just spam. Like if you had I don't know, right? This is why I wonder about on the multiple times. If you have a really high learn spells roll and spell check, and maybe you can only do that if you're a really high level wizard anyway. I'm not sure how the system works. Then you could just take that book and over 3 or 4 days, double, triple, whatever. Now we don't know what the benefits are, so maybe they're pretty situational. So it might not be a big deal. But I always wonder about that. To me, the 10 hours, now when you get up to 100 hours, because it is much more substantial, that to me feels more like a blocker. And I can say, for example, in the game I'm playing in Daniel, aka Bandit Keeps game, our gang has not been able to. There's always something coming up, always something that they want to do, or something events happening, which has made it really hard for them to stop themselves and take downtime. There's always something that they want to do, or in trying to, like I mentioned, I guess last week sometime when I went through kind of and at the end of one of the streams, I went through a little bit of what happened in our game. There was this. It's always it's hard for them to get downtime. Things happen. Oh, okay, we just want to tie the bow on this thing, and then we're going to take downtime, and then in tying that bow, something else happens. We got to go do that. Oh, now we got to do that, right? And so from the 10 hours would have been easy, but the 100 hours is a lot more substantial. They're like, oh my gosh, I need 3 plus or 4 days, whatever, 96 hours, whatever. I guess was that 4 days? Basically more than 4 days. Then that feels like, okay, now assuming, right, and that's going to obviously campaign, and I don't know Dungeon Master Class's campaign, but then you're taking multiple days like that. If there's stuff happening in the world, now it's a little bit dicier. And then, of course, you get north of there where you have maybe multiple weeks of study. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, this is kind of a serious deal. But when it's just 10 hours and you can just kind of run the 10 hours and there's no other cost or chance of failure, I kind of think like, I'm not sure I want to do that. But on the flip side, the rolls, other than whatever character generation stuff you do, like could I have maximized my learn spell roll or spell casting check more? I'm just rolling dice. Like I can't do anything about that, right? So if I just roll cruddy, now I got to go from 10 hours to 100 hours, and how much of that was my own action? None. And I think as I go along, stuff like that, I kind of feel like that's, and again, especially with two rolls, presuming you've got, a 50% chance of missing one of those, each one is maybe 50% chance, which means you got a pretty good chance of missing at least one of the two, uh, or whatever it is. I don't know. I don't know. Then I feel a little bit bad for some of these because now it's like, okay, now you got to do 100 hours, and there was nothing I could do as a player to prevent it. You're just rolling dice. You're rolling dice. It's up. Obviously, I don't know if I could mitigate it through using a laboratory or do whatever. Like, could I maximize my chances more? I'm not sure. But in the absence of those things, so I love reading these things. I'm always like, oh, that's really great. But then I'm like, oh, I don't know if I love that. But that's just me, personally. I'm just yapping away. Dave says that they had a downtime problem in the West Marches style game. Yeah, it can definitely happen, right? You have all this kind of limitless, I don't say limit, but kind of limitless quote unquote time. And if you're playing in maybe a classic hex crawl type situation where stuff isn't really active, where oh, okay, we can go here, we can go there, but that stuff's not really coming to us, then someone can say, I'm just going to take 3 weeks to do all this stuff. And then it's like, okay, well, I guess you could do that. And then, you can have these knock-on effects of suddenly you thought guys are going to be at power level, whatever, but now they're suddenly jumped up here and they haven't gained levels or anything, but it's just that they were able to just bump up all this stuff. It's always where I go through these yin and yang, or not yin and yang, kind of like yo-yo sort of things. Like, oh, I like some of the stuff. It's kind of like the crafting thing, where it's one of the reasons why I just don't love crafting so much. And some of those things is kind of similar. And this is the end of some. This is at this point an old cappuccino for the working man. Tale for another time, but I got a new grinder, by the way, that I'm kind of pretty happy with. So here's let's see. So okay, so here's a book. So this is called The Insidious Good. The author P.N. O'Reilly. I don't know if the PN is supposed to be pronounced, but P.N. O'Reilly. A dense and technical philosophical treatise. The thesis of The Insidious Good is that the inherent goodness of the elves allowed the world to degrade into vice and evil, but that the diligent effort of humans built a civilization where the innocent are protected. Secondarily, it states that man, unlike other races, is both intrinsically good and evil, having a conscience to guide them to virtue, as well as base urges pulling them to vice. In its closing, it uses all this to show that correct action motivated by inclination is undesirable compared to correct action motivated by duty. All right, so this one doesn't have a. I don't know I don't see an inherent benefit, but I just like it as a random book. Not a new grinder, GRINDR. So sorry, I should have specified. So dirty minds don't get the wrong idea. A coffee grinder, an espresso grinder. Well, a coffee grinder that is suitable to grind espresso. Maybe I should put it that way. Not really a such thing as an espresso grinder per se, but not every grinder is really suitable to grind beans for espresso, since it has to be. Espresso has kind of certain. What's the word? It's just they can be finicky. Espresso grinds. It's kind of got its own unique circumstances. Is that right? The word? No. Conditions? No. Qualities? Yes. Yeah, actually, Dave says you want a conical burr grinder. Conicals are good. Conical is what I almost I have had already. But actually, what people are liking a lot now is the flat burrs. So this one's actually a flat burr grinder. And they have different things. I feel like, and I'm not, the funny thing is as much as I enjoy coffee and I've gotten into sort of coffee stuff, I don't feel like my palate is super advanced. I can get fruity, chocolatey, that kind of thing, but I can't get, this is stone fruit. This is raspberry. This is apple and molasses. Like I don't I'd love to go to a tasting with somebody who tastes all that stuff. I mean, I've gone to one tasting before and it was fun, but it wasn't really. I'd love to see someone like, okay, professional tasting person. What are all things you got? Let me see what I can get over the same grinds. But from what I understand, the conical burr does good with giving you more sort of uh, body and that kind of texture. And people like the sort of the separation, I guess they would call clarity in the flat burr. You can't really go wrong either way. I don't think it matters, at least for me, all that much. But my old grinder is conical and this one's flat. And that's just the burr shape, right? Like a cone versus a disc. Dave says they could totally taste those things when they're not getting hit with the COVID. That's awesome, Dave. I want to get there at some point. I probably should spend more time trying to, because I don't really like. I try to dial in my drinks, kind of knowing what I know, but I don't really sit and try to look at the bag and figure out. And I get good coffee. I get third wave coffee. I appreciate a lot of it. I just don't. I haven't tried to hone in my own taste, which I probably should. Let's see. Oh, here we go. So so here, this is the last one I'll read from him. So I can get some other folks here. This is a write up for Frizen the Coin Maker. The story of how PC was almost killed for making a magical item for this powerful patron. I don't think he meant Patreon. I don't think Patreon exists in that world. I missed the where was Frizen mentioned before? I don't know. We'll just read the story. So Frizen the Coin Maker, dwarf, killed in the year 993. A malformed and insane dwarf, Frizen was one of the major goblin leaders in the First Goblin War, based in an iron, copper, and silver mine in the New Goblin Mountains. He made weapons and armor for the goblin forces. He also minted coins, earning him his moniker. He used humans as slave labor, some of whom the greater soldiers rescued in 992. They later returned and killed Frizen in 32 Num 994. And here I guess we're going to get to the story of Gareth the Gnome. Gareth was a gnomish priest that traveled with the greater soldiers. Gareth proved very valuable during several of the greater soldiers' exploits, including rescuing the survivors of the siege of Castlemaine, where he scouted the keep in the guise of a wren and located the survivors. Ooh, guise of a wren. And I guess he had a magic item, the amazing short sword. While the greater soldiers were campaigning with the legions during the First Goblin War, Gareth offered to make a magical short sword for use in the war. With the permission of Imperator Rufus Tiberius Publius, the legions funded its creation and collected the required materials, losing several men in the process. One of the requirements for the sword's enchantment was total secrecy about its construction and function. When the sword was revealed to Rufus, it was sized for a gnome, and its only magical ability was that when you looked at your reflection in its mirrored blade, your reflection smiled dumbly and waved too enthusiastically back at you. Rufus threatened to kill Gareth. The rest of the greater soldiers quickly ushered him away. Gareth maintained that it was just a misunderstanding, and he hadn't had time to explain the obviously amazing property of the sword. But we don't know what is the actual amazing property of the sword. Is it really just that that this just looks and smiles, waves? I like that it waves too enthusiastic back at you. Like it's not just you, and not just you smiling when whatever your real expression is, but that it's not even just that it's waving back enthusiastically. It's that it's the too much enthusiasm that it's even off-putting to you, the viewer, who's looking at yourself, going like, "Oh no, that's too much." Oh, that was good. I like that. I want to know: was there more to the sword, or was that it? Did he? And the other thing I want to know is, did Gareth know that was what was going to come out of the sword? Because if he knew, then you had to think you had to know that was coming. That you're gonna hand that back to someone. They're not gonna think kindly to it. Or was he hoping for something better on some rolls and just got this kind of strange cosmetic effect? Back to coffee. Dave says we have a couple local roasters here in Olympia. Oh yeah, okay, Olympia. I know that I've heard of some roasters from Olympia. I don't remember them offhand, but yeah, I felt like Olympia was one of those places that seemed to have some good roasters in there. They're fortunate. Oh, wow, Dave, you occasionally roast your own beans? Man, that's nice. Terrence says, amazing property. It's your daily affirmation. It's the Stuart Smalley of long swords, as it were. Okay, what else have we got here? We got Terrence. Well, Terrence is here, so he can be here to. So see, here's Terrence with like the essay that to me is like a whole week's worth of entries. So we read the Gods War, the Bloodless Stone. The stuff on dragons was really good. Did we read part 1 of the stuff on dragons? All right, we'll do orc notes. Or is that from week 1? 7 days ago. No, if it was 7 days ago, this would be week 2, right? All right. Oh yeah, because is this the one? What did we do on orcs? I can't remember my own stream, but here's some orc notes. Orc notes from Terrence's Lore24. Origins. Orcs are a relatively new race on Zerth. Is that how I'm pronouncing it right? Is it Zerth, Terrence? You can let me know if it's Exerth or something else. In the age of the Tenebrous War, the Dark Lord created numerous true breeding species to serve in his armies and administrations. Much like the Archfey he was making war upon, and to a lesser extent his shaky allies, the gods, he chose to use his fellow humans as a base for his creations. He regarded orcs as his most successful. The Tenebrous King created orcs by combining aspects of boars, frogs, and humans to form the perfect foot soldiers for his war machine, being ideal for long military excursions and sieges. They were also used as especially effective hunters, trackers, and poison detectors. Well, gotta have a poison detectors. So on Birth and Life, orcs tend to be born in 2s and 3s. Orc children are usually fraternal twins, with identical twins being rare, and single births being exceedingly rare. Single births are usually considered an omen of good or ill fortune, depending on other factors. Orc physiology is unusually heritable, meaning that any child sired by or onto an orc in a cross-species pairing will be just as orcish as the orc parent, with only very minor indications of the other parent's traits. So while quote-unquote half-orcs exist in technicality, physically, it is a largely useless distinction. Orcs are considered physically mature by age 16 and live from 65 to 70 years. Physicality. Common orcs range from 5.5 feet to 7 feet tall, with a tendency towards quickly gaining muscle mass in their youth, though even the not particularly strong ones will still appear stocky or stout. They have green skin and hues from light to dark. They have thick hair and colors ranging from light brown to black, or very rarely red. They also tend to develop patches of fur on the arms, legs, shoulder, chest, and back. Orcs have wide pointed ears with tufted tips that tend to stick out at a rather severe angle, either straight out or slightly downturned, and deep set eyes that come in black, dark red, dark brown, or dark green. Their muzzle like faces sport short tusks that jut from their lower jaw and a flat porcine nose with a deep philtrum that runs from the nostrils to the thin top lip. Is that gap, philtrum? Philtrum? Because I'm not familiar with the term, but it sounds like that's what it would be to me. Orcish night vision is particularly keen, though they can develop mild photophobia in adulthood. Some orcs, about 1 in 50, are born with an especially keen sense of smell, though it is thought that this trait was much more common in the days of the Tenebrous King. Orcs can survive 3 times longer than a human without food or drink, are extremely resistant to toxins, and all orcs can detect poisons via smell. All right, so we got some cool stuff. This is definitely kind of lining up a little bit more with the sort of old school kind of porcine orc, but some differences too. I like the fact they got some frog in them. It's not the what's that phrase? It's not the size of the frog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the frog. Traditions and culture. Orcs are ancestor worshippers and tend to dwell on the glories of the past. However, much of their histories get mixed up with boasting and a naturally conspiratorial cultural mindset that pollutes facts with conjecture and outright fabrications. Excuse me. Orcs consider themselves a diasporic culture on the continent of Zartun, descendants of ancient invaders from the continent of Vontar who served the Tenebrous King, who they view as combination demiurge and sort of ancestor. On Vontar, they are the most numerous people. They also maintain a strong warrior culture ethos, with many adult orcs from wilderness areas joining mercenary groups, private armies, and raider bands to increase their status amongst the tribes. Even the orcs in settled areas often wear face ornamentation, armor, and weapons in their day-to-day life as a way to differentiate themselves from other races and to maintain a reputation as a people not to be trifled with. Additionally, most orcs, both settled and nomadic, are taught to be constantly prepared for the return of the Tenebrous King, and while many modern orcs doubt the reality of such prophecies of the Dark Master's return, they still believe to go unarmed to invite misfortune and disapproval from their disapproval, whatever, from their ancestors. Other cultures. Orcs tend toward insular communities, and clinging to the myths of a violent past put them at odds with the rest of the world. Even something as simple as orcish clan names, which tend to be gruesome, violent, and insulting to other races, serve to alienate them in cosmopolitan settings. So we have some sample clan names: collectors of enemy faces, chewers of elf brains, dwarf marrow suckers, wearers of human skins. Skulls of our foes line the roads of our fortress like paving cobbles. Oh, that's great, but I have to say, I just Terrence, that's awesome, but there's something about the rhyme of skulls of our foes line the roads. I mean, or the half rhyme, I guess I should say, is great. And salters of the fields with widow's tears. Oh, nice. And of course, noting these are sort of English translations, these are much shorter in Orcish. Those are great. Orcs still harbor a deep antipathy toward goblin kind, even now, nearly 5,000 years after the Tenebrous War, and the most staunchly traditionalist of them will refuse to work with them or even remain in the same building with them. Here we have a great picture. I presume you drew that, Terrence. That's a great picture of, I'm not sure what the orc is holding in his hand, but he's got a brew. Very nice. And then there's another one, another picture of an orc, more of an action shot. So great stuff on the orc. I really like the one, what was it? Borg frog human combo. I like a lot. I like the fact that they've grown. It reminded me, what was that? I didn't love that. Was that movie with Will? Was it Will Smith, where it was kind of like the Shadowrun thing happened, and it had all the the shadow. What I mean by the Shadowrun thing is like in the modern world, and all the kind of fantasy creatures popped up again. But maybe I should say this way. I like the fact that there's been a cultural drift from orc as evil guys henchmen to something else with some evolution of the ideas and the thoughts, and they're still there, but they're different. And it's like their origin story, but it's not necessarily their reality in the now of whatever this is, which I appreciate, because it can, in a way, it's and I don't know how Terrence intended it, but it's a little bit of like a tip of the cap to the kind of grumsh thing, but saying, hey, we didn't stop there, right? And that's why I always feel like is sometimes an issue where you get these things like, no, the orcs were da da da. It's like they're like that, but then they're static, right? That orcs are this evil creation of Grumsh, and that's it. They can't ever be different than that, because when Grumsh created those first orcs, that's it. They were just locked in place, and there's no concept that they might actually grow over time. And what I appreciate about this is, yeah, you've got that, right? They were created as from humans, as this kind of evil hench people or hench beings, whatever you want to call them, right, of the Dark Lord. But there's been thousands of years since then, and they didn't stand still, and things have changed and shifted, and the Dark Lord's not really around doing it anymore. And and whatever's happened, but they're kind of being left in some ways. They have this freedom to kind of become their own people, and they are, and they still have a lot of the traces of that stuff, and it still is there culturally and in their religion and in how they think about themselves and all this stuff, but it's not dominant in their lives, and that I appreciate that a lot. Ian, oh yeah, Dave says Bright. Yes, Bright was the movie, correct. And yes, that was Ian says that was 100% a Shadowrun movie. It definitely was hitting a lot of those things. Look, and kudos to them, because Shadowrun, that concept, and I'm not going to say that Shadowrun necessarily invented it, because I don't know, but that kind of idea of Shadowrun, this kind of if you're not familiar with the RPG Shadowrun, and I don't know if it did it first, there's probably things that did it in literature, but it was my first. Shadowrun was the first time that I experienced this concept, was that you're basically in the modern world, and there's some kind of event. I forget what the event was. Was it it might have been like a Native American ritual that triggered it. I can't remember, like I can't remember what it is. Anyway, and then basically all the fantasy creatures, or not all, but your typical fantasy creatures from kind of D&D and sort of fantasy in general, are now they're here, or they've reemerged. I don't know if they've literally come to being, or they come out of hiding, whatever it is, like they're back. And then of course that everything else is going on. You're adding that to this sort of neo-noir kind of stuff from was it William Gibson, and kind of all this stuff. So you had this really kind of cool melding, but just that idea of just in the modern world, just fantasy being kind of pop into us. So it was really great, but no one really had taken advantage of it in TV or movies or anything that I remember. And then Bright finally, I guess I'm sure special effects things had something to do with it. And then Bright finally did. And I didn't love Bright, but I could at least say like, oh yeah, they finally, someone actually tried to take that idea and run with it. There's probably even I guess in a sense, Alien Nation, I guess it's not really the same. I guess just in fact that you have the kind of these new things out there, and then just from the concept of having basically something from somewhere else coming, and then the world kind of evolving to like now you have aliens, and it's not just like, oh my gosh, something crazy is going to happen, but like what's like in 10 years or 20 years when the aliens or these creatures or something are kind of, some ways the system has absorbed them, and what does it now look like, and what things are going on in that kind of way that had a little bit of alienation kind of vibe to it. But hopefully someone else, maybe, I'm sure I'd like to see other people kind of take that idea and see if they can do something a little bit differently, maybe a little bit better. Dave says their issue with that movie was that the orcs were hated because of something they'd done in their past. I think it would have been better if they were just because they look different. Yeah, I mean, I honestly, it would have been better if they didn't just need to be hated. But yes, that's another thing, right? So they did a worse job of the orcs than Terrence did with his orcs, because that's like the Dark Lord used them thousands of years ago, and now they're just kind of like, they're just hated. And it's kind of like, well, that was thousands, like people have done stuff thousands of years ago, and sooner than that. It's like, why are we just hating on orcs? I agree. They could have done something better with that. But I think I can at least understand how they were just keeping with the kind of dominant tropes. But it's just something where I feel like someone could come in and just do a bit better. Do a bit better. According to the Shadowrun Wiki, 30 April 2021 was the day of the Goblinization event, and this caused the coffee famine of 2022. Interesting. I think I got out of Shadowrun because I had Shadowrun maybe first or second edition, so I don't think we'd gotten to, or maybe I just don't remember reading about the Goblinization event. Is that what they called it? Because I could have sworn it was called something else. Wasn't there something like the Ghost Dance? Was that what it was? The Native American Ghost Dance that set it off? It's been so long. That's Shadowrun's one of those books that I need to look at again. Not for the mechanics, because I think especially with the decking and with the old, I know they tried to fix it in newer editions, but I think that's maybe fixed some problems, created new problems. But just in terms of the setting and the flavor, because I always thought the setting was super evocative, at least to me. All right. What else can I look at? So let's see. Let's see what Brian Smith got going on here. This is a recent one. All right. So this one, Field Goblins, and I like the art. Always like the art. Short fur and whiskers, fangs and a long flickering tail, large tawny eyes shining with mischief, standing 4 feet tall at the most. They hide easily among the tall grasses found in the plains, and pass as small children in cloaks when skulking around settlements or luring travelers into traps on the road. This variety of goblin found amongst the daybreak plains can be quite sociable, although incredibly easy to influence, and often they find themselves falling in line in the presence of trolls, doing their bidding, waylaying travelers and stalking secrets, stolen item caches all through the plains. They rarely have any strategic understanding of why they are being forced to do this, but they know all too well the trolls are uncaring and will gut and eat any goblin who disobeys their commands. A field goblin nearly always carries at least one map, quote unquote, of where their caches are, often mislabeled, misremembered, indecipherable, or just flat out incorrect. Clever goblins will barter these maps and keys if they get into trouble while sneaking around a city like Garadem. Most are rightly suspicious of the validity of these treasures, but there's no denying the allure of riches out there somewhere waiting to be collected. Hey, Ryan Smith, just in time. So I didn't comment on this, but I really love this idea of these little guys and their treasure maps, and maybe just take a flyer on one because it's just probably wrong, or even if it was done right? It was probably wrong and incomplete, but that you never know you might get. And it's of course it's a great as a GM. What a great way to get some kind of plot hook out there because who knows where this treasure is pointing to, this map is pointing to, but there's probably something there. Is it what you're looking for? Is it something else? Is it a trap kind of thing? There's just lots of possibilities. I like the idea that you might stock up on these treasure maps, maybe try to get multiple ones, see if you can put bits and pieces together, but and also think that there just might be all these hidden caches laying around if only you could find them kind of thing. Really nice. Hey, Fellowship of the Table, welcome aboard. Fellowship of the Table just joined the Lore24, so I don't know if you posted anything. I know you made your thread. It was just a let's see. He's got another. Where's this going? Oh, he's got a Google Doc. Well, let's go check out the Google Doc. We'll read one. Look at this. Right after my own heart. Look at a small, clear, concise, bam bam. So first, Sagluana, which is an aquatic. So I guess this is a sea. Are you doing hexes? Totally fine. Honor bound. Are these people? Honor bound social diplomats on squids with no government. Ooh. Are you using a what tables are you using? Are you using just your own tables, or these with tables that you've found from somewhere? The Veti, gem collecting magocracy, they them ruler with pet apes dedicated to a slumbering god. These are really good. Oh, did these go somewhere? Oh, they do. Oh, I need access. All right. Not to worry, but these are really cool. A witch nation run by a coven who has set up a caste system and forces the highest class to run the nation while they worship a forbidden deity. Ooh, I like it. The story engine deck products. Okay. A wealthy nation that dominates the market for a kind of wood that makes paper for spell scrolls. Oh, that's a really neat idea. Governed by the friends of the twins who control access to those woods. Oh, sneaky. Yeah, those are really nice. These are really evocative. I'll have to check out that story engine. Did you have to tweak these results a lot, or are they just kind of like right as they came out of the deck? Brian Smith says they're into gem collecting mages with their magic ape minions. You can't go wrong with magic apes. Can't go wrong with magic apes. Let's see. And I guess I can look at. I guess I can do my own. Oh yeah. So you last night. So here's an idea I'll just throw out there. I was thinking I might do a video on this separately, but whatever. I'm here. I kind of put this out, and then I thought maybe I was cheating, so I did something else. But I had this idea about. I've been reading. I really like the a coop, a collection of. What's it? A collection of something pedantry, which does a lot of I guess military history type stuff. Did some really great. He's done some really great things looking at kind of TV shows and media and basically how they portray kind of military stuff, historical military things. And then the web address is acoup.blog. I suppose I could just type that in. I think that's what it is. Is that right? A collection of unmitigated pedantry. He's got some really great stuff in here. So one of the things he was talking about was this idea of how the article or collection, I guess it's a series of articles about basically how video games and maybe in media portray ancient and medieval generals, really kind of pre-modern warfare generals, and kind of what their ideas of what generals could do versus what generals could really do. And it's really kind of interesting, gets into a lot of things like the limits of what, if you're playing a lot of what he uses as examples are things from the what do they call those war games, those video game war games. There's a bunch of them. But is there one here where I could get into? No, let's see. No, I'd have to go back and find it, which I don't want to, but I want to say Art of War, but it's not Art of War, but it's something. Any case. Whereas in those kind of war games, you can think like Age of Empires would be similar, right? Where you have, you see everything, and you can move your troops, and your troops are just automated. As soon as you click on some units and tell them to do something, they go do it, kind of all this stuff, right? And how that doesn't match up at all with what an ancient general had access to. Your army's spread out further than you can see. You can't give and he mentions Game of Thrones or something where they give like a little wavy thing, and then troops just start doing stuff, and it's like they can't see you. You're behind your troops. No one's looking to see where you're waving the flag, and even if they could see you, then only the closest things around you. Like, how does this work? And it kind of is interesting to see, really getting into like the limits of what you could conceivably do. And that's before you get into things like what you're in the culture you're in. What does your culture require of being a general? Talking about, say, the ancient Greeks, who might require a general to be in front, kind of leading the charge, if you will, which means you're even more limited because not only can you not see things, but you're under fire essentially. So you don't even have time to sit back, versus maybe in other times in other cultures where you would get in trouble if you did that. You'd think, oh, I'm going to show my bravery in the troops. You think you would get yelled at. Basically, you'd be they would grab you and pull you from the front, kind of thing. But in any case, what you can do is really different. And one of the things he gets into in the blog is the concept of what you know and where you're getting your knowledge from, which then led me to think about this concept of reports. And this to me is reports would be this system that I would use to kind of replace your rumors. So instead of having a rumor table, if you will, you would be developing informants and then gathering reports from your informants. And at the basic level, it would be the same as kind of your rumor table. Like, you're a first level guy, and maybe, I don't know, I don't want to get down the weeds, but let's say maybe you're doing character generation, you could have something like, oh, hey, maybe as part of character generation, you get one informant, somebody who who knows things or hears things and can get it to you, kind of thing. But you might not have any, right? But in any case, when you're first level and you're just starting off, the only person you might be able to recruit as an informant is the guy at the bar who you slip a silver piece or whatever to, who then tells you kind of like, here's what I've heard, kind of thing, right? So at a very low level, it might look almost the same, but this is something you could develop. And I envisioned it, at least originally in my brain, and you could take this and wherever you'd like to, as kind of a downtime kind of thing. It's not something that I think, at least in my mind, this is something we'd kind of remove from the role playing part of it. It would be like, I'm going to spend a certain amount of days, and I'm either going to be trying to gather some informants. I've got some coin. This is how much coin I'm going to spend around and try to get some people in my network. Or I'm going to kind of like send out to my network of saying, hey, what's going on? Like, what have you guys heard? Right. And again, you might start with just one guy in town. The barkeep is probably on everybody's payroll, making a small fortune in their side hustle as everybody's informant who's handing out stuff. But maybe he gets more advanced. And here's where I have like Varys from Game of Thrones, right? The master of spies, or whatever his name was, master of ravens. I don't know, whatever it was. He had, or Littlefinger, I think, too. Also, they all had their sort of spy networks out there, and they're getting information back. Now, information doesn't always have to be correct. Sometimes it can be very wrong, and you could have fun with how wrong is the information and whatnot. But it becomes a kind of a downtime activity. Like, hey, you're back in town, either between adventures or maybe whatever. Other people are, the wizard is preparing their spells or doing whatever they're doing. What are you doing as potentially some kind of roguish type, or somebody who just wants to be this kind of spy master kind of thing? Well, you can do these things. You can send out messages, or if you have maybe depending on how you set it up, maybe they're all sending messages back to you where you've alerted them, like, I'm staying at the inn. And so they're just sending reports in. So you come in, the barkeep's like, here, you got these letters or whatever. Messengers have brought these letters and then you could get the reports. And on the subject of maybe why you might want to do this, Brian Smith says kind of domain intrigue. Kind of. I mean, you could build, the thing is, you could take it in whatever direction you want. It could just be stuff about, and this is where it's open-ended, right? It could be, I heard about a dragon over here. Someone discovered a dungeon over here. That kind of thing. Where can we go next? It could be the answer to that question. Let me see what people found. Oh, a guy in the town over sent me a message saying that a farmer on the outskirts of town, his kid fell into a well, and apparently there's something else down there. Like, whatever. Like, it could be that, right? That kind of like that rumory sort of stuff. But it could certainly, depending on what you as whoever's controlling this ring of informants wants to ask for or become valuable, it could be that other thing. It could be domain intrigue, if that's what you're into. So it's really flexible. I'm not putting any limits on what kind of information you could be seeking. That'd be up to you as the player and their character. Like, what are you trying to find out? Are you trying to find out for new adventuring locations? Or are you trying to find out which of these, you know, which of these kingdoms or whatever around you are going to war, or like who's coming, who's like, what do you want to find? Like who's getting married to whom, like what lands are for sale, like it could be whatever you want. That would sort of be entirely up in the realms to you. So how it would work would be the same. Then you would just get into, well, it would really become more about who do you want to know. So you as the player, like, look, that the barkeep is going to know about certain things. Yes, the farmer whose kid fell in the well, he's going to come in and probably come to the tavern and try to find help, or just if the kid, or whatever happened, it was a fatality, maybe they're just coming in to be sorrowful, and they're going to find that kind of common things. If you're trying to find out what's happening at court, the barkeep's probably not going to know unless it's already something that's so out in the world that you could probably find out anyway. But then maybe you try to reach out and get an informant who's at court. And of course, in terms of the game master, if you start getting people involved in, I do want to know this stuff, so now I need to try to figure out, well, who do I know? Those kind of things that I see in the shows and movies I really appreciate, or I always want to bring in the game when someone's like, well, who do we know? Who do we know in there who can help us, right? And that answer is usually like, well, we don't know anybody. In a game, it's like, well, I don't know. I don't know anybody. We haven't gotten that far in the game. Nobody from court has approached us to do something, so we don't know anybody. This could be a means of, okay, well, maybe you could try to find somebody, like maybe you can do something. And I would hope maybe that the concept of having this is something that's kind of mechanical, in a sense that, no, if you get this stuff, you can get more rumors or more reports, and then maybe as you progress and you develop it, get higher quality reports, or you can get kind of corroborating reports if you have multiple folks who are in a position. Terrence says, sounds like a job for Lassie. Certainly if it's a kid in the well, that is definitely a Lassie type job, that you could then work with. And then I thought, just thinking in terms of, there's these informants, you just really need to, from the GM's perspective, it's, I think you just want to kind of rank them in some way. You can use numbers, whatever, to be like, what do they can, or, put them in sort of categories of what can they know. Could be court intrigue versus, I don't know, the common people kind of stuff. Maybe there's, military, religious. You could make as many different categories as you want, whatever makes sense for you. And then just kind of how reliable they are. Maybe you got a guy who hears everything, but he's notoriously, lies or exaggerates to something else to make his information worth less, or at least not as accurate. Some other person might have a very narrow scope, but gets very accurate information. So you can just kind of have fun with that. And, whatever, if you need other stat blocks, you can have them. But in terms of their informant stat block. And then the final piece of this was my thinking that if you make it something kind of mechanical, and the idea here is we're not going to role play it out. So we're kind of going to get past the 10, 15, 30 minutes, whatever we're playing of, hey, come into the bar and ask the guy and flip him a coin. Like we're going to push that. We're going to abstract it into this kind of like, no, I recruited the guy as my informant, and maybe you could have some fun role playing that out. But once you've done that, you don't have to do that 50 times. Even the 5 minutes of, hey, I come to the barkeep, ask him what's up. Like you can just get this list. But unlike just like giving them a list, which I think often does, is like, people say like, hey, we're just going to skip this. Here's the list. Like this I hope that having that as a mechanical thing, something that can be improved, would encourage some folks who want to improve it to be able to. And then it could also be something, if you wanted to tie it to a class, like you wanted to have a spy class or some kind of flavor of rogue or thief, this is something that you could give them. Hey, you get X bonus on whatever role we're doing to determine, accepting, if it's something like a hireling offer kind of thing, which you could leverage for the recruiting folks into your networks, whatever that's like, much like they might get their charisma bonus. Maybe you get you're a spy master or a spy or rogue, whatever you want it to be. Then maybe you get a bonus to whatever that role is that can then increase. And maybe you get more, you can get more informants or something like that. So you could kind of tie it in with a class feature and make something. So that was the kind of idea I had. But then I realized that's kind of not lore. It's like a mechanic. So then I did create kind of a lore bit, which just is like in this area that I'm working on, the Fenlands, I added some this idea of just talking about what it's like to communicate in there. And in this case, in the Fenlands, it's mostly by messengers, people on foot, because the lands are treacherous and fog shrouded, and it seems to mess up birds' sense of direction, and you can't, the grounds are not, there's the roads and stuff are not of good enough quality to really allow you to really gallop on the roads. And then if you go off road, you're just asking to break your horse's ankle or fall into some kind of quicksand or muck. And so you're going to have to just go on foot. And that because it's kind of important that harming or obstructing a messenger is not looked upon kindly, which is not to say that, their bodies might not disappear, that the messengers might not just vanish into the mist, because who's to know what happened? But you certainly don't want to really get caught doing anything. And then really the last thing I wanted to mention, when I started this series, I've been reading this, I discovered this thing called Zettelkasten. Has anyone heard of Zettelkasten before? It was a note-taking methodology. It's funny because if you search it up on YouTube, the beginning couple of minutes of all these different, well, at least the ones I was all finding, is all giving you this, basically the same spiel. I think it's a German, I want to say he ended up being a sociologist, but he developed this whole system for taking notes using note cards, or I think Zettel for bits of paper. I think that's what it's like, because you just cut kind of bits of paper, and then Kasten is a box, and it allowed him. He ended up being extremely prolific in writing books and articles, and he put it down to this note-taking system. And I've been reading about it, and in fact, I'm really sort of into it enough that I bought this book, which just came in yesterday. So I just kind of started reading it, How to Take Smart Notes, which I think is the book that kind of put the methodology on the map, so to speak. I guess it kind of gained fire a few years ago, so I'm late to the party. This book, I think, was originally in German by, I think their name is Sonke Ahrens, so apologies if I've butchered that name. This is the second edition book. But as I don't know how I was looking at something on Oxford. No, not Oxford. Cornell. So I was looking at something, I don't remember why, on the Cornell note-taking system. I'm always curious about these and interested in these kind of different systems of taking notes. And I think I had looked up a long time ago, wasn't even recently, something on Cornell note-taking. And then it popped up on my feed again. I was in Massachusetts, and I was up late, and I was sitting there on YouTube, and all of a sudden it popped up back my feed, Cornell notes. I was like, oh yeah, I remember looking at Cornell. So I said, well, let me look. I don't remember if I looked at this video again, but I'll just look at it again. I don't remember if I looked at it originally on my original search, because it was one of those things that, as often happens, I'm intrigued about and then falls off my radar and I forget about it. I was like, oh yeah, Cornell notes. Let me take a look at that. So I looked at that Cornell notes one, and then you get into related videos, and I see this Zettelkasten. I'm like, well, what the heck is Zettelkasten? So then I click on those, and I hear the spiel about the and I heard it, because like every video has to give you this thing of, it was developed by this German, whatever. And it was like, it's always funny because they always give slightly different versions of his accomplishments. Over 400 books, over 300 books, over 800 articles, over 600 articles. They're all, it's like they've all taken the Wikipedia page and just summarized it slightly differently. So that's kind of fun. But what intrigued me about the idea is, I'm hearing it, it reminds me a lot of kind of the sort of things I've been, the kind of methodology that I've been leaning towards since last year with the kind of Dungeon 23, and then this year. So I'm thinking there's some usefulness, and I'm just going to give you a quick bit about it, because we're already at an hour, and I haven't even finished reading it all the way, so it's totally not even half baked. What is this, like an eighth baked, slightly baked? It's just getting into the oven, or I'm just still kneading the dough. But some really fascinating things, because I think that it's a totally kind of different purpose and somewhat different way of using the system. But man, I think there's some real potential here for, if you are trying to figure out maybe how to organize your lore, or maybe you're just getting started on Lore24 and you want to think about a system to kind of how to work it out. I think it's really, to me, it's just, I feel like already my eyes are like open to something new way of looking at things, or at least a better, more concise, more developed way of looking at than maybe my very primitive approach has been. And I'm sure I'll have more as I kind of dig deeper into it. But the concept is that, and a lot of folks are doing this digitally, so you can still do this, I think. And there are folks, I think, out there who still, are buying physical note cards and doing it. So one of the things, when you look up, and I've watched now a bunch of videos, but I mean, I'm definitely not to mean that doesn't give me any kind of expertness, since I've been doing this for just a couple of a couple of days. I've been looking at this. Yeah, Terrence says it's parboiled. Yeah, I wouldn't even call it parboiled. It's mostly raw. I'm still prepping it. It's in the prep phase. I'm still cutting it. I'm still shaping it. So you one idea per card, one thing per card, which is something that I've been talking about, right? Atomic. Right? I've mentioned that a couple times with Lore24 stuff, and last year with Dungeon 23, I was always on like just one thing. So that was the first thing that caught my attention. Like, ooh, one thing per card. Like that's right up my alley. Yes. All right. Yeah, that's great. You want to make sure that it's a complete idea though. So you want to get at least the bones of something complete, and it should be simple, concise, but complete, and it should be standalone. You shouldn't need a whole bunch of additional context. But I think particularly where people found it, much like when we were talking about earlier about, well, hey, people are using Macedon and they're appreciating the character limit of Macedon or a tweet or whatever they call them, a toot or whatever it is on Macedon, right? Is being kind of keeping to this. There's the same thing is kind of involved with this idea of the note card. That's the slip of paper is that you are limited into how much space you have. So you kind of have to be really just concise. This is not about writing up the final form. This is about just getting out, being really concise about what the idea is, what the thing is, and just making sure you have all of it there. But just the bones, right? Doesn't have to be fleshed out. And you can, if you got the space. And obviously, if you're using a digital format, which is what I've started doing, you're going to have as much space as you can. But I would say, right, to the extent that you can be just really concise, and just like if it's bullet points or just words, whatever it is, just get the whole thing out there. But you want to be able to, the whole idea of this is that you write this thing on this card and then you put it in, you put it away, let's say. And then 6 months later, you pull it out again, that you should be able to kind of get back the thing. So you want to have enough of it in there. So when you look at it later and you've forgotten what kind of bender you were on when you wrote the thing down in the first place, that it's just not a mess, right? It's not like those notes, something you wrote when you just woke up in the middle of the night from a dream and you think, oh, I'm going to write this thing down. I'm going to remember what I was talking about the next day. And the next day you come and look at it and you're looking like, I don't no idea what I was writing. So you want to get enough of it there that you can kind of stand on its own 2 feet, so to speak. Didn't need to know all this other stuff, but it should just be kind of like really tight. And then really the only other bit, and there's a little bit more complexity to it, is that and this is especially true with when you can do digitally, is you kind of tag it, you give it tags. And the tags are sort of when you're looking at related topics or ideas and things. So, for example, let's say you come up with a great room, right? Maybe you tag it, room, because it's a room, and then maybe you tag it with, well, what does this relate to, right? Maybe you thought this like, well, this is really matching up with an area in the dungeon that is I don't know, necromancy, right? So you could put, it's a room, necromancy, whatever. And then if you had other things in there, but I think you want to kind of keep it with sort of related ideas or topics. Where might it fit in? Not necessarily what it is. So granted, I have room, but really like, okay, this is like, maybe necromancy and maybe dungeon, something like that. So then now you're going through, you're doing stuff, right? Now you've done a whole bunch of stuff. You've got it in whatever your organizing factor is, whether this is a physical book of note cards, in which case they use some kind of numbering system. You number all your cards, or use some other kind of thing so each card had a number, and then at the bottom you would literally could write in like, oh, this is related to cards 3, 72, 48B, that kind of thing. Like that's how you would do it. In a digital system, we can kind of tag things together. And then of course you can use cross-linking. Like if you already had a room on a necromancer, then you could cross-link this dungeon room you created with that necromancer, right? So you're making connections. It's kind of the key thing. So you're getting all these ideas and you're able to connect them together in a way. So what can happen is, let's say you got all this stuff down and it's a whole, right? We're going Lore24. So maybe it's a dungeon room today, then it's a magic item tomorrow, and there's something else. You got all this stuff, and then 6 months from now, you've got a whole pile of these daily bits. So I think the key with this person was able to get, or what the value is, that you're not building things like in the classic Dungeon 23 approach, right? You were building a dungeon one room at a time. This is not That's top down. I've got a whole dungeon and I'm going to fill it, right? I'm looking down and I'm filling it. This is more bottom up. So I'm creating all these bits and I'm tagging them as I go, and I'm seeing relationships where they are. If I see them like, oh yeah, the other day I did this, and I'm kind of putting them together. And now I come back 6 months later and I say, okay, man, I really need a necromancer's lair. My party, they're going to go find a necromancer. What have I got? Now I can go back to this whole bunch of stuff and I can find those tags again. Okay, necromancer. Oh yeah, I had all these things tagged in necromancer, and I can put them together to build this thing that I want. And maybe some of them work for this situation, some of them don't, and I can build. And then I'm have all this stuff. So basically, I'm able to take all this and use it in a way that's very flexible. Because if I built this whole mega dungeon, then all the stuff's kind of locked in that mega dungeon. And I think that's why, for me anyway, maybe the appeal of the notebooks I was never able to kind of stick with a bit, because it is very linear. I have to remember what page of my notebook, what thing, they're all kind of locked in this one space. Whereas on the cards, where by their very nature, you could slot them in different areas. I can pick up this card, I can put it with this other stuff, put it here, put it there. And certainly digitally, you can do that. You can have a whole bunch of stuff and create a bunch of different things from it. Maybe you have a couple of rooms you marked that were necromancy type rooms. Maybe you take a couple of those. Maybe you had 5. Maybe you take 3 of them. You create a necromancer's lair. You could come back a month later. You need his henchmen who went on their own and kind of junior necromancer. You could take the other 2 rooms or some mix and match those 5 rooms. You have a different lair, using those same things as your basis for this new idea. Using, oh, this thing came up that I had, this monster that I created, like all this stuff. And so I think that for this Lore24, I think soon I'm going to start jumping around more. I've been kind of very much on working on one thing, but I don't know that I'm going to keep working on that one thing, that I'll be able to say, hey, I'm going to have this. This just caught my attention. It doesn't really match anything that I have so far, but it's not junk. I'm going to note it. I'll put some tags in there to kind of talk about what I think it's about, and I'll put it aside. And then see, in a month later, I can come back and look at that note and say, well, where does this fit in? Does this note fit in with some other things that I came up with? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. If it does, you can merge them together. I'm going to talk more about this down the line as I've developed it more, but I think it's a really fascinating thing and really got my creative juices flowing. Here's a really great way to kind of leverage what you might be doing. And maybe it frees you up to think about, you know what? I don't need to keep working on the same thing. Like, everyone's been doing great so far. I think I'm doing orcs. And so I'm going to do the next 5 days, I'm going to be doing orcs. But then you might think, well, today I don't have anything on orcs. I've got something on elves, but I'm working on orcs. Darn it. I don't want to work on elves. But this would be like, no, just write it down. Just write it down. Mark it as, tag it with elves. Tag it with something else. Magic. If it talks about magic or creation myths, whatever. And then when you come back, maybe over time you find that you've got a bunch of things on these creation myths. You can put all that together and you have something. Or you find you tagged a bunch of stuff on magic, and you go back and like, man, I need my games coming up, and I need some stuff on magic. All this different stuff comes up on magic, and you can see, ooh, this stuff works for me. This stuff works for me. Oh, this is great. Or elves. And you get a whole other set of stuff. It doesn't have to just be elves. Maybe you're doing kind of the classic trope of orcs versus elves, and then some orc topics come up that have to do with elves. Maybe some other things have to do with elves. And so you can basically, you're writing this, you're creating this bottom layer that you can then mix and match to build stuff. And it seemed really fascinating to me, but I'm just nearly into it. But I wanted to share my enthusiasm with you. And I think, like I said, I think I'm going to start doing more like that. So if you're following what I'm doing and you see me starting to organize things a little bit differently in terms of maybe the topics I'm covering, and starting to put kind of tags and related stuff, that's, I think, what I'm going to be doing. And I've been using AnyText as sort of a digital font. And there's a whole other piece to do with, you're also taking notes if you're reading things and you find stuff you like from there. Getting that also works. In the original system, I think there were 3 or 2 boxes of cards he had. One was for highlights and references to material and kind of things they've pulled out of that. And the second one was kind of his ideas, and then you kind of put them together in a way. But I haven't gotten that deep into it. But certainly, as I'm reading things from blogs, I'm trying to now do it better. I use apps to read stuff, and I go through and highlight them. But I was noticing, and I was reminded as I was starting to read through and watch the stuff on it, is how I go through and I'll read an article, and I think I use Omnivore is what I've been using. It's kind of my reader, but I used to use Instapaper, and I've used other ones. What's the other one I've used? I forget in the past, but in any case, I would highlight stuff, but I would never come back to the highlights. The highlights are just going to sit there. And I'm sure I've got highlights in Instapaper that I haven't used in ages. So I'm trying to get a lot better now, thinking like, and part of the system that kind of taking your highlights or your references and making a note card about them, as I'm going to try to do a lot better. Like I read the stuff, I highlighted the passages or excerpts or ideas because I thought they were really interesting and I wanted to remember them, but I need to get them out of there. I need to get them out and I need to get it somewhere else. So I'm going to try to do a much better job of getting stuff from the highlighted phase into my own kind of digital box, and then being able to take that stuff and then and merging it with this other notes, just ideas I have, thoughts that come to me, and then seeing what comes of it. So I'm going to be doing. So I think that's kind of where my particular Lore24. I'm going to take it, and as I develop it better, hopefully over this month, maybe I'll have a chance to sit down and live with this and finish reading this book. I'm very much only just starting it. Will work, and I'll get to a place. I really like the card thing. It just kind of fits in with me. I know it could be really hard digitally because there are no size limits. I mean, you can self-impose them, but any kind of note-taking app is not going to stop you from writing. But I think that kind of idea of just sticking to one idea and just trying to get it down to its kind of basic, simplest, most concise level, I think is a good one. I'm not always going to get there, but I think it's a good point to kind of shoot for. And at least I'm not going to worry maybe so much about writing the whole phone book down, but just like, let me just get out the idea kind of thing. Death Cap Stories uses a commonplace book. Yeah, I've heard. I usually am in odd spots. That's why I've always, that ends up working best for me, the digital thing, because I always tend to have my phone with me. And that's the one thing I'm always going to have with me, regardless of which jacket I pick up or whether I take my backpack or a different bag or whatever. I generally don't ever forget. There are a couple things I'm pretty good about never forgetting. I forget lots of stuff. But there are a couple things. I don't know how many times I've showed up to game night and I've forgotten my dice, things like that. The one thing I don't ever really forget are my keys, my wallet, and my phone. I'm pretty darn good 99.99% of the time. I'm always going to have those three things. So my options would be really good is I could fit something in my wallet, or attach it to my keychain or my phone. And the phone works doubly well because I can, if I'm reading something electronically, I can, easy to pull stuff off. That kind of works really well. And then you've got a lot of note apps. If I was really, I mean, if I'm by my desk all the time, absolutely a commonplace book, which my understanding is, and someone can correct me, it's a book that kind of lives in a common space, so it's just kind of there, and you just write in it. And I guess you could have multiple ones. Maybe I could have one in where here I am, and then one over in the other room. I guess I just have to remember to come back and collate them. I think the one thing that they say you're kind of supposed to do is they're basically three kinds of notes. They're the highlights I talked about. They're what they call permanent notes, which is what I've spent most time talking about. And the other one I think they're basically like your everyday notes. And there's a name for it. I just don't remember what the name is. But the everyday notes you're supposed to review basically at the end of the day or at some other time every couple of days, and then find the notes that you took on those days and figure out which ones are really meaningful. You feel like these are good ideas. These are things I want to really remember, and then move them into your permanent notes and then basically trash them. I mean, now with digital ones, you don't really, the trashing part seems unnecessary because it doesn't take up really any meaningful space. The idea was that you go through those. I think there was a name that was basically like temporary notes. It wasn't called temporary notes, but something similar to that, where it was just like, hey, these are just for now, right? Just get your stuff out, and then you can come through and kind of take the good bits out, right? You come back, find the pearls in there, and you go, oh, get them out. Death Cap Stories go, little pocket notebooks always go where I go. Yeah, I just always end up forgetting them. That's the thing. I never forget my phone, pretty much, because I'm always, checking stuff, I'm doing stuff, but all little notebooks, I end up leaving them around. Then I've got 8 of them that I'm trying to keep track of what's where. I always start off strong with notebooks, and then I just end up, they become scattered. I start forgetting it. I put it in the wrong bag. I can't remember where I left it. Like, just things go awry. But I always figure out, like, I only got one phone. And so my phone's always been there. It would actually be a good discipline thing. I really always love the idea of physical stuff. I do a lot digitally, but I don't actually love the digital workflow so much. But But I think for some folks it might help with their Lore24. I'm going to be my own guinea pig as I kind of develop this, as I'm reading through more of what the idea is and sort of bending it a little bit, because he was writing books about particular things. So, you might have a book on, or an article on, parenthood. So you're gathering all the bits about parenthood and putting it in. For kind of a Lore24 sort of world building, it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit different, maybe not as different as I want to think, but, and as digitally, we have the freedom to kind of tag things lots of ways. And of course, there's text searches that you can do and all these different apps that make it very easy to gather stuff. But I like the idea of really consciously trying to pick and say, yeah, these things kind of work together. So I'm going to kind of web them together. And of course, unlike on a physical card where you might have to make lots of little notes, it's easy to add I think all these apps adding tags or some other way of linking things together is super, super easy. And so you can get to this part. But if you want to do it, physically, if you're interested in Zettelkasten and it sounds interesting, you can see online there's videos and articles about how to do it physically using the original kind of casting system. And then, of course, with different apps. I saw Obsidian. I think Obsidian's a big one for using it, but I think it's very easy to set up with a bunch of stuff. But I think for Lore24 and similar things, and for Dungeon 23, I think it would really well, because imagine instead of having one huge dungeon that may or may not make a bunch of sense together, imagine if you could basically take all your rooms and cut them up and have them thematically in sort of thematic drawers, in a sense, so that when you need I really need a mad scientist kind of room, and you could just flip through and say, oh yeah, I made some rooms that I had tagged mad scientist, pull them out, and you can make a dungeon out of them. Because I was thinking about it too, is like with the dungeon rooms, like really the doors, it's not really that important, right? If I needed to be a dead end room or the end of a room, okay, I need that to be whatever. Like I feel like the important part of the room is kind of the what's inside of it, and maybe the bits about it that are built, not necessarily the doors, but just kind of its nature and its physical look and all that stuff. And having a whole bunch of rooms that you could just kind of mix and match, sort of like having those geomorphs, or you can just kind of plug them in there and then put the connecting hallways and whatever where you need, would be really much more useful, I think, to most people than having the giant mega dungeon of 365 rooms, but then the rooms aren't really differentiated by which ones you really thought you did well and which ones you really did poorly. But imagine going through there and saying, let me organize them. And these rooms I didn't really spend much effort on, so I can just kind of trash them or put them away. These rooms I think would be really great for certain themes or certain things. So I'm going to kind of tag them. And if I got other stuff, I've already got tagged. And then when I'm trying to build something, I can really tag all stuff together. It seems great to me. But I understand some folks are probably like, this is the most boring conversation ever. But I thought it was cool, so I want to talk about it now, but I will develop it further. And with all that being said, let me know in the comments or wherever you find me how you're doing on your Lore24. I've got, as noted before, I've got a whole section in the forums all about Lore24. If you want to come in and read what different people are posting, or if you want to join in and post on your own, always happy to have you. It's at I'll throw this in the chat. Help, actually. But we're working away. I mean, for me, I think what I enjoy about it is there seems to be not just the kind of making of things, but then this other part of the emergence of sort of a methodology behind making things that I'm intrigued by. Because I definitely am. I'm always thinking, like, how am I going to use this stuff? Like, am I going to get through this? And I think this one, because I can work on anything, I think my chances of getting pretty far into it are pretty good. But then there's also aspect of what am I going to do with all this stuff once I've got it? And I think that was another thing that might have been off-putting sometimes with the sort of Dungeon 23 part of it is, well, what am I going to do with this giant dungeon that I maybe never run? But this kind of system of trying to organize things, saying, well, I don't need to use the whole thing, but I can cut it up into bits, or I can start off with all these different pieces, and then later on I can assemble them into different works that then will be useful to me. Now I'm thinking like, ooh, now I could use 365 different rooms that I can configure in a whole bunch of different ways to make a bunch of mini dungeons or regular sized dungeons, or even just not huge mega dungeons. Like, yes, I could, and I could relate it with all kinds of other stuff that I'm coming up with. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh man, that's a lot more useful to me. So I'm really excited about it. But as usual, it is untested, unknown, untried, at least by me. So I will be trying my best, and I will be reporting back what I found, and hopefully it'll be useful to other folks. But regardless, whether you're doing Lore24 or any other endeavor, just trying to do a little bit of work every day, right? Just keep on trucking and see what you get to at the end. Let me know how you're going wherever you can find me. Other than that, I'm going to call this a stream. Game on, everybody. And I'll talk to you later. Bye now.